Braves and baseball fans, it's time to take a trip from coast to coast across Major League Baseball.
There it goes, a long drive. If it stays fair, home run.
One strike away. Sandy into his windup. Here's the pitch. Swung on and missed a perfect game.
Fly ball deep left center. Grissom on the run. Yes! Yes! The Atlanta Braves have given you a championship. Listen to this crowd.
Left side, Swanson to first. Braves, world champions.
Braves and baseball talk, straight from the diamond. Here's Grant McAuley.
Hello and welcome to From the Diamond. I am Grant McAuley. These are the Kia Studios. This is Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. It is a Sunday, and we are wrapping things up for the Atlanta Braves in Major League Baseball in what was a very eventful week. A very eventful weekend, as it turned out, for the Braves, though the trade deadline may not have been the most eventful. Well, we'll get into all of that. They certainly went up to Bristol and had themselves a good solid 36 hours, it looks like, worth of fun, and ultimately came out with a 4-2 victory in what was a unique aesthetic. I'll give it that. But unfortunately, you can make plans around the game of baseball, and the weather can oftentimes affect and change those plans. And that's exactly what happened to the Braves and Reds. But ultimately, Atlanta able to pick up a win on Sunday against the Cincinnati Reds. And with that, I don't want to jinx this, and I certainly can't take a victory lap because, well, no pun intended, this might deserve it under different circumstances, but the Braves season has kind of devolved into a place where obviously the deadline was what it was, and the Braves are where they are in the standings. But I don't want to alarm anyone, but this was a Sunday, and the Braves physically won a game on a Sunday, even if it started on a Saturday. And that's the first time the Braves have done that since May the 18th. That's a 10-game losing streak on Sundays. And even if this one goes down as a win on Saturday, I'm just here to tell you, it's nice to crack a microphone, talk about baseball, and not be coming off another Braves loss, which effectively for a lot of those weekend series was just taking all the air out of the balloon. Even when you had a little bit of momentum, the weekend was ending on a down note. So moral victories may not count for too much, but it just feels like a little bit of at least a sigh of relief. I don't know. Maybe I'm just feeling that because it's something that it's been an overriding theme of the show, but I'm happy to say bon voyage to it for at least a weekend. We'll see where we are next Sunday when we meet again. But we've got a little under 2 hours here to discuss what was, again, a very eventful week across Major League Baseball and an eventful week for the Atlanta Braves. Even in not doing something at the trade deadline, the Braves effectively, I think, sent some messaging about what they are going to need to do ultimately by the time the winter gets here. And that was really my takeaway from the trade deadline. I didn't expect there to be blockbuster moves. I certainly didn't expect the Braves to be big buyers, even though you kind of leave that little low percentage chance that, hey, maybe they'll just come off the board and surprise you, and just weirder things have happened. But with the Braves being where they are, you just kind of thought, all right, well, maybe they can cash in a couple of chips, and by that I mean expiring contracts, get whatever you can get for them, restock the farm, or maybe fortify the roster in a different way for something beyond just 2025, and see where you land on it. But Thursday came, and Thursday went, and the Braves did not deal those expiring contracts, and we're going to hear a lot from Alex Anthopoulos coming up here in about 15 minutes, and it really comes down to what the Braves have found themselves in this year. Has been challenge after challenge after challenge. So to imagine that the trade deadline was going to go as anyone imagined was probably wishful thinking. But I don't know how much wishing and hoping was going into that trade deadline, because even if you did trade those couple of pieces, I don't really feel like it was going to move the needle all that much. And not to spoil what's been a conversation that we've been having for a while, so I guess I can't spoil it if the conversation's already been had and it continues to be ongoing, but I don't think anybody was expecting to get altogether too much for a Marcell Ozuna or for Raisel Iglesias. And maybe if you decided that you wanted to cash in some of your other bullpen pieces, you could have gotten in on this frenzy that was the MLB trade deadline with what I think is nearly 3 dozen trades, virtually every team involved. The Atlanta Braves, though, ominously quiet. And maybe that silence was loud for a lot of Braves fans because they just expected something to happen, something, anything, better than nothing. But I don't think that's really how Alex Anthopoulos looked at these trades, the opportunities to make them, and ultimately the return. And we'll hear more from him. And I don't want to talk all about it and then, run all the way up to it and let him give you the answers after I've already given them to you. But I think that the Braves were trying to walk the fine line of not necessarily cashing in chips that could help them next year, obviously. We heard him talk months ago, before the injuries, that, hey, Chris Sale's not going anywhere, even though the Braves have struggled. We have heard the Braves maintain that, hey, we like our catching situation with Sean Murphy and Drake Baldwin. We had heard that. We've heard for years that the Braves are not really interested in discussing the pieces of their core that are signed to long-term deals and just willy-nilly trading them away as soon as they show any sign of struggling. I think we all knew those things coming in. But there are words and there are actions. And I think there's going to come a time for action for the Braves. And I believe that it's this winter for everything to be laid bare and put out on the table. Because you've got to start figuring out what exactly you're not, what exactly you need, and how exactly you can answer both of those questions to do the things that you expect to do and basically need to do based on where you are with this roster and what would still look like, just looking at the talent on hand, the opportunity to do way more winning than we saw in 2025. And 2025 at this point, a lot of times I'd say what happened in the series over the weekend, what it means, where the Braves are, what they need to do, what's coming up next. And, you're thinking about a playoff hunt, but those thoughts have been gone for well long over just this final weekend or whatnot, or this trade deadline, closing out the month of July. We've seen what the Braves are. Unfortunately, we know what the Braves are not at this point. And again, that job of bridging the gap between those two things belongs to Alex Anthopoulos, and we are going to hear a lot from him. But if you look at it on Sunday, the Braves were able to do something that's a bit rare, and that's win a baseball game on a Sunday. And as I mentioned, it did start on Saturday night, and it was, and we'll get into it a little bit more later, a very unique showcase for Major League Baseball at Bristol Motor Speedway up in Tennessee. I thought it looked very, very cool. I thought that there was a lot of possibility to it, but I think ultimately the rain really took the shine off what could have been and should have been, by all rights, a really cool showcase for Major League Baseball. And maybe they'll do this kind of thing again. Obviously, they're capable of putting a baseball field just about anywhere. We've seen them do it up in the Field of Dreams, and that's a pretty neat showcase in and of itself. This one, a pretty neat one. We saw the Fort Bragg game that the Braves were involved in. I believe that was in, 2016 maybe? It's been a while. But a cool showcase. Now, obviously, you would have liked to have seen a lot of things go differently. In addition to it not raining, you would have loved to see Spencer Strider get that start. You would have probably loved to see Ronald Acuña Jr. out there on the field. You talk about speed, you talk about power, you talk about just a dynamic presence and personality. Well, Ronald Acuña Jr. is that, and you would have loved to have seen him lined up against Elly De La Cruz and the Reds, and both teams be in the playoff hunt. But that just wasn't the way that this story was shaped up, because the Braves were not able to shape up their season after climbing out of the abyss in April into May and getting above 500. It's just been a tailspin for 2.5 months, and that has put the Braves where they are. And we know that because if you've listened to this show for any amount of time this season, unfortunately, I've had to be the bearer of bad news Sunday after Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. Now, the Braves are 47-63 following their 4-2 win on Sunday over the Cincinnati Reds at Bristol Motor Speedway. It was kind of a fun game. Eli White with 2 home runs. And how about Hurston Waldrop? I'll get into this later because we're going to have to talk about the Braves rotation, obviously, which you might be asking me, hey, buddy, what rotation? Well, that's probably a good question. But Atlanta's got to figure out, and has been trying to figure out over the past week or more, some names that it can call upon to help get them through this final 52 games over the last 2 months of the year. Hurston Waldrop could be one of those names. We're seeing that Carlos Carrasco is one of those names. Eric Fetty is another one of those names. It was a week ago in the second hour of the show that the Braves acquired him after he'd been cast off from the Cardinals. And we might see some other cast-offs that get a shot on the Braves pitching staff just to try to get them through the final couple of months so that they can figure out in the winter exactly where they're at. And from a health perspective, allow for Chris Sale or Spencer Schwellenbach to perhaps pitch again this year. We'll see. Reynaldo Lopez to perhaps pitch again. And we're going to get some clarity on what I believe is going to be a long-term injury for Grant Holmes, who joined his other opening day starting pitcher brethren on the 60-day IL. So it's been, the Braves rotation has been going through it. But the Braves as a team were going through it before that because of their inconsistent offense. That's kind of what landed them where they are. And all of that has added up to what I think. And this is kind of the theme of the show. So I'll go ahead and lay it out there. And you're going to hear me ask Alex Anthopoulos about it because I got the opportunity to do that on Thursday. But this winter, I think is going to be the most important for Alex Anthopoulos since taking over prior to 2018. They got good faster than I think was anticipated when he took that job, although you knew number one farm system in baseball, number one prospect in baseball, and Ronald Acuña Jr., a lot of great young talent. You still had some talent at the big league level that was just starting to kind of find itself. And Freddie Freeman obviously was a known commodity, but Dansby Swanson, Ozzie Albies, and the likes. And you started to see these prospects, many of them, become stars and contributors to the Atlanta Braves, who over the last 7 years have done some pretty good things. But 2015, man, you're talking about a course correction, a hard left turn. That's what it's been. And now that they've stayed good for that 7-year run and run into this trouble, what now? What will the Braves do? How will they bounce back from this? What will be the answers to the questions involving the offense, involving their health, involving the leadership of the club moving forward? We haven't gotten an answer on where exactly the leadership in the dugout is going to come from next year. Brian Snitker is in the final year of his contract. Will he be back next year? I think that discussion is going to get louder and louder over the final 6-7 weeks of the season, but it's going to be interesting either way. We've got a lot to get into of the interesting variety on this show, even if the Atlanta Braves have not been able to give you what is the customary run through the summer and the excitement and the hope of a stretch drive. When we come back, though, we are going to hear from Alex Anthopoulos. We got a chance to chat with him on Thursday, hear him unpack the trade deadline, and much more. We'll get to that next on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley here on Sports Radio, 92.9 The Game, and the Odyssey app.
I love baseball. Now back to more Grant McAuley and From the Diamond on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley, live from the Kia Studios on a Sunday as we wrap up the weekend and the week that was for the Atlanta Braves. And it was certainly one with a lot of discussions, but not necessarily one with the kind of news that many of us were expecting. Want to dive into the trade deadline, even though we know not much went on for the Braves. There was some roster shuffling prior to that, but then a very quiet Thursday leading up to the 6 p.m. deadline, even though the rest of Major League Baseball seemed to be buzzing. There were dozens of trades, all kinds of transactions going on, and you thought perhaps the Braves would have a couple of pieces at least that they could spin off to a contender, maybe grab a prospect, some salary relief, whatever the case was. There were a lot of different angles and different ways you could look at it. Had the opportunity on Thursday to be part of the media call with Alex Anthopoulos, and I wanted to play some of his thoughts and some of his answers to the questions that came with why the Braves were so quiet and why there wasn't any activity on a couple of the expiring contracts at the very least. So let's start at the beginning with Alex Anthopoulos summing up what was a quiet Thursday on his end.
I know there was a ton of speculation on, obviously I read it, I saw all of it for months about different names and so on, and I'm never going to comment on our players and things like that as all that was going on but our goal in this deadline was to focus on guys that could help us in 26 and beyond, or had the chance to, whether that's through club options like guys like Kinley and so on. It didn't materialize. But again, guys that have club control beyond this year, you can have conversations now and those can lead into the winter. Those can follow through. So obviously a lot of players were moved this trade deadline. In terms of us trading our players, it's tough to get specific about guys that are here and on the roster and all that. Like any trade deadline, you have tons of discussions, right? And you're talking about all kinds of players and people are inquiring about all kinds of players. So I think sometimes there's speculation. There is speculation, and some of it's predicated on how guys are performing and things like that. But I could tell you that guys that had club control beyond this year, in terms of conversations, that was a different bar for us. And again, I'm trying to be mindful of the fact that we still have guys on the team and the clubhouse and so on. But look, anyone that was under club control or had the ability to be under club control for next year, we'll have discussions about anybody. Just we're doing our jobs, but this is not the only time to complete trades, just like we're trying to acquire players.
Now, again, a lot of discussion about expiring contracts and what the Braves were looking to do with Marcell Ozuna, who is in the final year of his deal, with Raisel Iglesias in the final year of his deal, but also knowing that each of these guys not playing up to the capabilities they showed even a year ago. How is that going to impact the talks, impact the returns that the Braves could realistically expect from trading these two gentlemen? Well, that was all part of the discussions that Alex Anthopoulos had to have and part of the calculus of what the Braves were weighing when it came time to pull the trigger or not pull the trigger on a deal. Let's hear from Alex Anthopoulos again about the mindset when it comes to moving expiring contracts.
I'm stating the obvious here. Obviously, Marcell Ozuna's got an expiring contract, but he has 10-5 rights, and he's got a full no trade. And we don't, as a matter of policy, give out no trade clauses. But, which is great. Guys earn it. They've been great. You can accumulate 10 years of service with, in the league and 5 years with the same team, and you earn that right because you've been productive and performing. You have the right to have a full no trade. So, things like that, those are much more complicated, and the club doesn't have control in that matter. I'm not trying to insinuate anything at all, but those aren't just expiring contracts. They're not as simple. And look, obviously, Raisel Iglesias was the other expiring contract. I know his name was out there. And again, I haven't had a conversation with him, so I'm trying to be mindful and respectful of those things. But we weren't just going to give players away, move guys just to move them or just to dump salary. That happens at times at trade deadlines. We've been part of just teams wanting to save money at the deadline, and we would take on a contract. We were not in that position. That's not something we were going to do. If we were going to move any player, so I'm not speaking about Raisel or anybody, we were going to have to get something back that we liked. And look, and I'm speaking for the 26-man roster. Again, I'm stating, obviously, some guys are just not having the years that they've had in the past. So that would ultimately, goes without saying, would impact the interest level and the inquiries. So again, I'm not calling anybody out. I'm not specifying anybody. I want to be very, very clear on that. But you can give players away at any time. But I don't know that that makes the organization better unless your alternative is to just save money. So that wasn't something that we were going to do. We were going to have to get something we like back. In our view, we were never put in that position leading up to 6 o'clock tonight. But with respect to controllable players, a lot of discussions that will likely continue on into the winter.
Now, Ozuna's down year, coupled with a hip injury, clearly reasons why there may not have been a robust market for him. I talked about this on social media, saw Bob Nightingale of USA Today discussing the fact that the Arizona Diamondbacks, who were holding on to what I thought was going to be perhaps the most sought-after slugger at the trade deadline, Eugenio Suarez, well, they didn't love the market for Suarez, who was eventually traded to the Mariners, but it wasn't exactly a feeding frenzy. And this is a player who is among the major league leaders in home runs and plays a defensive position. But the Diamondbacks still didn't feel that Suarez was as sought after as perhaps we believed he would be heading into the deadline and leading up to 6 p.m. on Thursday. Now, with Marcell Ozuna, if we were talking about this a year ago, I think he could have been in a similar position because he was one of the best sluggers in the National League, if not the best DH. But unfortunately, the hip, the lack of production, those are two things. Then throw in the money, and you can kind of understand why Marcell Ozuna didn't change addresses. And that's not even to mention the 10-5 rights that he has as a player who has accrued service time in the league and with one club. Now, putting Ozuna aside, it was curious that Raisel Iglesias did not find a new home, that the Braves couldn't find any takers for him. And I know the first couple of months of the season were particularly rough, but the last 2 months, Raisel Iglesias has been way more good than bad. I don't know if that's exactly a ringing endorsement, but there were a lot of relievers, as you would imagine this time of year, with pitching being so important to every club, that were traded. Why exactly Raisel Iglesias didn't go anywhere, I'll let Alex Anthopoulos weigh in on what the Braves were thinking on their side of things.
Generally speaking, when it comes to trades, if we thought there was a trade where we were getting some value back that we liked, we would have made a trade, or two or three or four. Fortunately, that didn't present itself. Our goal in this deadline was to try to get some form of help for 26 and beyond. Obviously, that didn't materialize. The only thing I could say to try to shed a little light, generally speaking, is if we were looking at different trades and the pros and cons of a trade, not on a specific player, was let's shed some salary, and that was it. That didn't make sense for us. So that's it. It's not fair to those guys to try to pin that and pin a quote and say, he said this about this guy. I didn't say it, and it's wrong. And we talked about all kinds of, at the deadline, you ask about all kinds of players. It's an open season to have any conversation about anybody. You can talk about 26 guys on a roster. You might get quick no's, but you do. You'd be surprised the number of names people get asked about and so on. You're throwing it out there. So there's tons of discussions. So look, to your question about seeing some of these relievers, look, a lot of the relievers were having fantastic seasons, right? And again, I'm just thinking off the top of my head. I didn't really, and I wasn't digging in specifically because we're working on our own stuff, but Guys like Helsley's performing well, fantastic lever. Rogers with the Giants was having a phenomenal year. Duran, phenomenal year. These guys are having phenomenal years. And yeah, you do, when guys are performing at peak level and having impactful seasons, you're pushing for a playoff run, right? So you're pushing for, you want the guy having the optimal performance and do it all. It doesn't mean other bodies didn't get moved, sure. But when you talk about people who are saying, oh my God, these guys got a great return and so on, the guys they were getting back, that were either free agents or had some club control, like obviously the Miller and so on, these guys were having phenomenal seasons. They're performing really, really well. So, the reality of it is, won't surprise anybody, that's a big part of this, right? You got 2 months, playing into October. You want a guy who's hot. You want a guy who's having a great year. That drives things. When you're not, the value changes. Doesn't mean you're not capable of being the guy you were, but when you're not having the same season, obviously that impacts things, and that's fair.
So I think you can hear a common theme there, and I wrote about this for the Marietta Daily Journal this week. The Braves wanted to get some kind of return if they were going to pull off trades. They weren't just looking for salary relief here. This was going to be about making the team better in 2026 and beyond. And I know that there is a counter argument, and it's not unreasonable to say, well, neither of these guys are going to help you in 26. Could you get anything for them? And I'm guessing, just based on the fact that they're both still here, the Braves didn't really feel like they could get anything useful for them that would help them on the roster and on the field. And Alex Anthopoulos weighed in on the salary relief portion of this and why that wasn't really part of how the Braves were doing the math around the trade deadline.
I mean, look, I guess I'd say this. Obviously, there's other clubs. I've looked at I have to look at it when the dust settles with these trades, but I guess I'd say this. You've seen it happen the last few years. Because you can no longer make trades now after the trade deadline. In the past, use a mechanism called trade waivers, and you could still make transactions and so on in the month of August, and rosters basically get frozen for postseason play, postseason eligibility beginning of September. So you did see the last few years, and I'm not trying to be critical, but you did see some teams, put guys on waivers and just, clear some salary and so on. And look, some teams might be looking at, let's get under CBT. Some people might say, look, let's save some money and so on. But, that, and I don't know, that wasn't, I'm trying to be careful not to be critical, but I didn't see anybody throwing a celebration or party in the industry, right? I didn't see people applauding or celebrating those things. That's not to be critical. Look, everyone has to run their business the way they can and things like that. There's impact on everything. But yeah, gutting the roster and just dumping players and giving them away. We still have guys that we have 162 games we're playing. We have fans that bought tickets that are showing up. Now, I think fans understand if you're getting players you believe are making the team better and so on, fans are great. But if you're just going to take players off the roster and fill them with arguably players that aren't as productive and make the product, or impact it, and you're asking other guys to go play every day and grind and push and do everything, and guys to show up and still perform and run balls out and do everything and still have pride, go perform and set an example. We have a lot of young players on our team too. I think the message that would send organizationally is just wrong. That's what I feel. That doesn't mean if another club does that, they're wrong. Everyone has their own way to run their team and their business. So I don't see any merit to that unless, look, sometimes, like I said, 30 clubs have their own business issues and practices. If there's reasons that make sense, sure, teams would do that. And I understand, but from our standpoint, it wouldn't make any sense.
So with all of that said, it does leave some very serious questions for the Braves on how they will handle the next couple of months, but more specifically, the winter. The winter ahead for Alex Anthopoulos, I believe, is going to be the most important of his tenure with the Braves. So I posed the question to Alex Anthopoulos, and I'll let you hear that exchange right here on From the Diamond. Alex, I know, obviously, whether you made deals or no deals right now at the trade deadline, there's a lot of work that's ahead of you. Given what you guys have gone through this year, I mean, I know it's early. There's 2 months of baseball left to be played, but just how pivotal is this winter ahead for you and your group?
Yeah, I mean, look, when you get to this position, especially when you're taking this time at the deadline, you're talking a lot about roster for next year. That's, you're not doing your job if you're not. So a lot of things, I viewed it as our offseason started now, and that's really the approach that we took. Clearly what's gone on, the results and so on. We don't need to wait for November free agency to start for us to start our offseason. I mean, those conversations are starting. This was an opportunity in a window, right? Because GMs are engaged. There's no distraction of free agency. There's just 30 clubs can talk to each other and make trades and talk players. So we had a lot of discussions, and trade discussions and internal discussions about, what the roster can look like for next year. And again, we're 2/3 of the way through. So some of our evaluations on players could change in the next 2 months. Some of our own players, we've seen that before. Guys are performing, all of a sudden they're not. Guys get hurt. Guys that weren't performing all of a sudden finish with a flourish. That might impact things, but you're definitely taking a snapshot in time of where you're at. And we're talking about all the deficiencies and strengths, weaknesses, what we want to add. We're weighing the pending free agent market. I mean, everyone knows right now, unless people sign extensions, who is likely to become a free agent. So we have an idea of who the pool of players will be. There were discussions to acquiring potential free agents that we might have interest in this winter, and the thought of let's get them under our roof for 2 months. Let's get to know them a little better. It could help our chances, in signing them, right? They become a little more comfortable. They know. So we actually pursued a few of those things. So, when I talk about a ton of conversations, it really goes that far, right? That you would think, well, this guy's about to be a free agent. Why would you acquire him? Well, if we had acquired a few of those guys, I don't think I would have announced that if I'd done a call about it. I would have said, good player. We like him. I think we'd announce to the world, hey, we're going to go try to sign this guy. But, those are things we looked at as well. So when I say our offseason started in this window, in this period, it absolutely did. And obviously those conversations are going to continue.
Well, there you have it. A big winter ahead, and the Braves perhaps thinking about getting a jump start on it. But ultimately, as we saw, a quiet trade deadline on Thursday. A lot more to discuss about this. Obviously, we'll be unpacking this with the months ahead, and perhaps those talks will eventually bear fruit. Maybe there will be some player or players the Braves were pursuing around the trade deadline that could ultimately end up in Atlanta before this winter is over. But make no mistake, this is a critical winter for the Atlanta Braves. I've called it a pivotal winter for this club to find the missing pieces that it needs to get back on track in 2026 and, of course, beyond. We just heard from Braves GM and President of Baseball Operations, Alex Anthopoulos, his thoughts on the trade deadline. When we come back, I'll be joined by Brad Rowland of Hammer Territory. We will size things up for the Braves at the deadline for the remainder of 2025 and, of course, for the offseason to come. That comes your way next on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio, 92.9 The Game, and the Odyssey app.
Back to Grant McAuley for more From the Diamond on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game as we continue this week in Braves baseball. We just heard from Braves President of Baseball Operations and GM Alex Anthopoulos some of his insights following the trade deadline, and a very quiet deadline it was for Atlanta. We're going to keep that discussion going right now, though, and to help me talk a little bit more about that, I want to welcome in Brad Rowland of Hammer Territory. You can find that podcast wherever you get your podcasts. He's part of the Foul Territory network of podcasts and shows, and you'll be hearing a little bit more from Foul Territory a little bit later on. But I'll get to that when Scott Braun joins us. But happy to have Brad on board to discuss what was a deadline unlike any in recent memory for the Atlanta Braves. Brad, I appreciate you making some time to join me. I know that this is a time of year that baseball fans and Braves fans in the past have typically looked forward to. What's going to happen at the trade deadline? What kind of deals are going to go down? What's the club going to look like in the aftermath? And the answer, unfortunately, this year, Brad, was more of the same. And for the Braves in 2025, I don't know that anybody really wants to get talked into getting any more of the same.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment, I would say. It was already different in that the Braves clearly were not going to be huge buyers for the first time in a long time, and then it kind of just became a quiet week in a way that it was not necessarily expected.
No, it definitely did, and the silence, I felt like, speaks volumes, because this is a year where if you look at what the Atlanta Braves set out to accomplish, and I think they know it, obviously the fan base knows it, they have not come anywhere close to that. In fact, they have taken a giant step back, and I know that the trade deadline wasn't going to fix all of those holes, but did it surprise you to see that some of the aspects of the trade speculation about expiring contracts, or perhaps pieces that could be cashed in for something that could prove useful in the long term, the big term picture, that really nothing happened on trade deadline day? I know that they did a little bit of shuffling beforehand. It felt like they were kind of clearing the deck for the possibility of there being some kind of movement, and ultimately it was just kind of a big nothing burger for the Braves. Did that surprise you that there was just nothing happening of any particular size on trade deadline day itself?
It was certainly a little bit surprising. I think if maybe they did the tiny stuff that they did earlier in the week on the deadline day, it might have felt a little bit different, even though it probably shouldn't have, if that makes sense. It's kind of
Yeah.
one of those when literally nothing happens. I think the Braves might have been one of only a small handful of teams that didn't do anything on deadline day, if not even smaller than that. So it was a little bit strange. And really the only one to me that was genuinely surprising was that Raisel Iglesias is still on the team right now. There were enough factors in play with Marcelo Ozuna and 10-5 rights and other guys who are under team control beyond this season that I really just thought if at kind of the bare minimum we would see a move for Raisel, and when that didn't happen and nothing else happened, that was kind of the point of surprise for me.
Yeah, it definitely was. And looking at Ozuna's year, it started off in a way that you just felt like he was going to be able to do what he'd done the last couple of years. I think the hip injury was obviously an impact. He's basically been for 3 months not the same player that he had been for the last couple of years for the Braves. So I knew that that market was probably going to be niche at the very best. I mean, maybe somebody looks at the resume and says, okay, change of scenery. Maybe we plug him in here. Maybe he gets hot, and maybe we get somebody that can help us at least by getting on base, which Marcel has done fairly well this year. At least early on he did. But I wasn't shocked to see him still on the roster, given all the facts you just laid out, the 10-5 rights, the money he was owed, the injury, and the lack of performance. That's four pretty good reasons why maybe the market for Marcell Ozuna was a bit smaller than you might have imagined, say, back on opening day. Of course, nobody was imagining the Braves trading a player like that on opening day, so let me throw that out there. And in that vein, Raisel Iglesias, coming off of one of the best years of his career in 2024, a very rocky first couple of months, very homer-prone, the opposite of what you want from a high-leverage reliever, but it has felt like to me, with a couple of speed bumps aside, that he's more or less figured this thing out the last couple of months. I know he's on an expiring contract, was owed a little bit of money as well. We saw a lot of relievers dealt, which is part and parcel to the trade deadline. That, to me, was the one that was surprising, that the Braves couldn't find really anything in return for a guy who has been, not too long ago, one of the better closers in baseball.
Yeah, and you mentioned it, the some of the relievers that went for pretty high prices, and certainly Raisel hurt his own value on the market with the way he's pitched this season, but you made a good point. Like he has been better the last couple of months, not dominant necessarily, but better. And I think that a guy with that kind of pedigree, one of the things that we kind of can't know is whether the Braves are willing to spend any of the money to kind of maybe accommodate a trade. There's this middle ground between, he's owed what, $5.5 million worth of the season. Could they have paid some of that to get a market going for him? Because basically any team that is in it right now could use a reliever like Raisel. Whether Braves fans are out on him or not, he would help a bullpen most places. On the margins, things he can kind of improve on, all those things, but he's a respected guy in the league who's been doing this for a very, very long time. So that was, again, part of the surprise is that there's always room for relievers. He has pitched better. He has the reputation, and even with a kind of tough season for his standards, he's a guy that still would, at least for me, at least command a roster spot on any kind of playoff level team. So it's an interesting sequence of events that kind of led to him sticking around, and him being an expiring contract kind of adds to it because, like, for the Braves standpoint, what does he really do for you? And it was kind of funny that he ended up closing the first day after the deadline, which
Yeah.
kind of made everybody kind of laugh a little bit.
It did. I mean, I posted a go-ahead run in a crazy game in which the Braves scored 8 runs in an inning, only to immediately allow 8 runs in the bottom half of that inning. So you felt like, well, this is very 2025. Then they go to extras where Marcell Ozuna drives in the game-winning run, and Raisel Iglesias gets the save on the day that neither one of them were traded away. Now, I played a little bit of the audio here, and I'm joined by Brad Rowland of Hammer Territory on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. He joins me on the WadeFord.com hotline. I played a little bit of this Alex Anthopoulos audio prior to you jumping on. I know you've read a lot about it, and obviously you guys have talked about it on Hammer Territory. The Braves seem to be very reticent about paying their players to go away, basically. And on its face, that's a statement that I don't think should surprise anybody about the Braves. If they didn't feel like they could get something of merit for, just put aside Marcell Ozuna for a moment, but let's just talk about Raisel Iglesias in particular. If there just wasn't anything worth doing the deal, then it sounds like the Braves weren't going to do it. What did you make of all of that? Because there is the counter argument, and I can't dispel it, and I can't tell you it's wrong, and I'm not trying to go after anybody that thinks this, but if they're not going to help you in 2026, they're not under contract, and you're not going to get anything for them when they walk out the door, is getting something better than getting nothing. But I guess nothing is probably a relative term.
Yeah, I think I'm on the side of even if you have to pay all of Raisel's remaining salary to get something back, and it was never going to be an elite prospect, could have been a decent one probably if they had paid all of his salary. I would have preferred that. I'm on the outside. There's always factors that we don't know that are happening behind the scenes. There is the argument that we've kind of alluded to on my show as well. Like, okay, big picture, take 10 steps back and say, is the C minus prospect that you would have gotten for Rysel worth enough to be kind of wanting to burn the building down right now? Like, there's people that are really angry about this, and I was bothered by it too, and I thought that they should have done whatever they could have to trade Rysel for something. At the same time, the return would have been modest. So in the big picture, you could argue like, what is the impact? But still, this is a game of margins. You want to do what you can all the time to make yourself better. And I would have leaned toward, even if the cost was the same. And look, they already owe them the money. The money's spent. You have to spend the money anyway. Why not use that to kind of maybe get something in return for him?
Yeah, and I do think the other side of this, and I know that this probably got lost in the other 30 minutes worth of commentary about it, is that they still have a roster of 26 guys that if they can't fortify that roster, and we got to be honest, this has been a mash unit in the second half, particularly in the starting rotation. The bullpen's already been overworked. Other things have gone on, whether it's Ronald Acuña Jr. On this road trip, whether it's Austin Riley having to leave the game on Sunday. I mean, a lot of different things have happened to this Braves club, and they seem to keep happening to this Braves club. So there is something to be said for keeping some semblance of a roster constructed to get through the final couple of months. And if somebody doesn't knock your socks off, I don't know that they wanted to send the money out of town and pay guys to play someplace else, and that just may be the long and short of it. It may not be popular. It may not get everyone to put down the pitchforks and the torches and head down to the battery, but to put it in general terms, the Braves have just not been a club that's been inclined to do a lot of that in the past, and quite honestly, they haven't had to consider doing that in a very long time. So putting all of that aside, I think that we knew the trade deadline was quiet, disappointing, whatever you might like to term it as a fan, I think is probably pretty fair in those particular terms. But it, to me, points ahead to what this club needs to do, not just over the next couple of months, Brad, but this, to me, is the most important winter for Alex Anthopoulos in his tenure as Atlanta Braves president of baseball operations and general manager. Back in 2017, the fall, when he took that job and went into 2018, that was an assessment period. He was sizing everything up. He was getting to know a new organization, and they got good very fast. So the job, I felt like, pretty much swung. The pendulum swung in a different direction where it was, okay, how do we sustain our success? And that's been the job every season since then. But at no time in this club's recent history has it been perhaps on a little bit shakier ground than it is right now. How do you size up the Braves as we sit here in early August of 2025 and heading into that winter for what they need to start thinking about and putting in place, and maybe what they need to accomplish in the winter, which we can get into as we go along here?
Yeah, first, I agree with the assessment 100%. I think this is the most intriguing, most pressure-packed. And you could certainly argue there's different kinds of pressure. This is the same general manager, president, et cetera, that transform an entire outfield, and then they won the World Series 3 months later. So, like, things have happened in Alex's tenure, but that was a different situation. And, like you said, he took over and they immediately won the division his first season and won the division a bunch of years after that in a row. So it's a different situation, whether it's the most pressure packed or not. It's definitely the most different, to where they have an urgency level they haven't had for a very long time. Even coming off of last season, where it was disappointing, it was so obvious. Part of the reason why they did what they did was that they had so many injuries and they still managed to get into playoffs, all these things. This time, none of that goodwill is going to be there. I mean, you're going in with a roster that still has a lot of talent on it, and I think that people may have lost sight of that over the last couple of months. It's still a very talented roster, but that excuse isn't going to go very far when you finish where they're probably going to finish. And that means, to me anyway, that means more things on the table as far as aggressive ways to make this roster different and better than there have been out of necessity the last few years, because it's been on the margins, move here and move there. I think you don't have to change over the entire roster, but certainly they have to be more willing, I think, to listen to offers on different guys, make some more bold moves, and kind of just be more aggressive in general.
Yeah, and I think in this core, the guys that are signed to long-term contracts, some of them you're not looking to have conversations about. You're not considering moving. Others, on different levels, there are conversations that could be had. I mean, Alex has been steadfast about, if we sign these guys to a long-term deal, we signed them for a reason, but there are also reasons to make deals and to reassess as you go along, and he never said that they won't end up ultimately needing to do that in some cases if it's the business of baseball. So as you look at what the Braves did in putting together this core, whether it was signing Ozzie Albies and Ronald Acuña Jr., it felt like that was kind of the kickoff of all of this, to all of the extensions that have followed, the trade for Matt Olson, the immediate extension, the same for Sean Murphy, Austin Riley's deal, Michael Harris, Spencer Strider. I don't know if I'm forgetting anybody else, but trading for and extending Chris Sale, let's throw him in there. The pieces are in place, the names are there, but I feel like it's all of the complementary pieces that have hurt the Braves a lot this year. They haven't had the quality and the quantity of the depth they need. I'm not going to begin to tell you that they should be able to overcome losing their 5 pitchers from their opening day rotation at this point, but there feels like that this club is about as thin as it's been in the talent that it needs to just help get them through the 2 to 3 weeks, a month, whatever it is, that maybe gets them to the trade deadline where they find the missing piece. But this is also a club that's been incredibly flawed this year from the offensive side. So if you're Alex Anthopoulos, I think it's a roster construction, maybe a hitting philosophy discussion that you're going to have, not to mention the fact that you may be seeing different leadership in the dugout next year. So, Brad, I mean, I know I said it, I know you said it, maybe 2 different ways of saying the same thing. Intriguing may not begin to describe what the Braves have ahead of them this winter.
Yeah, there's so much nuance to it as well, and we don't have time to cover it all here. But they just changed over the hitting personnel a year ago as far as the coaching staff is concerned. So, like, do you want to do that again? You mentioned briefly the managerial aspect. That's definitely up in the air as far as whether Snit will be back or not. It seems like probably not at this point. All these things, and also you mentioned the rotation, and yeah, you can't paper over the entire rotation being hurt. But I think it's important to remember and not forget maybe 3 months from now, that's not the reason why they were where they were. It's the reason why things have gotten worse and worse and why they might finish as bad as they were. But they were pitching well enough to sustain, and they were still losing games because they couldn't hit. And that shouldn't be lost by the injuries that have happened, kind of during that run and now since then. So much uncertainty, but certainly for me, bare minimum, there's just a lot more on the table, and that adds intrigue to people like us that are on the outside trying to speculate and have fun with what's going to happen. But for the team standpoint, it's just a different reality.
Yeah, the speculation is fair. The conversations, I think, are going to be many. The fun that is had, I don't know. That's kind of a sliding scale these days. That might be subjective, but either way, I know I'll be talking about it. I know you guys will be talking about it. Take a minute and share with us how we can get connected with you, with Scott Coleman, and all the guys on the roster over there at Hammer Territory.
Yeah, first of all, you can find us anywhere you find podcasts at Hammer Territory. Myself, Scott Coleman, Sean Coleman, unrelated to Scott, but we joke about that all the time, and also Stephen Tolbert. The 4 of us kind of alternate and do probably like 4 episodes a week on average. It's a busy podcast, but Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. And Grant, I appreciate you having me as always. It's always fun to talk to you.
Absolutely. I'm sure we'll do a few more crossover episodes before 2025 has come and gone. And as always, I appreciate your time, Brad. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks, Grant.
He is Brad Rowland of Hammer Territory. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. When we come back, we will delve more into the Braves and the week that was in Major League Baseball, a very busy trade deadline. That's coming your way in hour 2 of From the Diamond, next, right here on 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
Baseball, talking Braves and beyond.
Baseball
with From the Diamond, Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. We will continue talking about the trade deadline, the Atlanta Braves, and all of the things that have gone on this week, of course. But we also need to see what else is happening across Major League Baseball, where it was an insanely busy trade deadline. And to help me break all of that down, I want to welcome in Scott Braun of Foul Territory, who joins me on the WadeFord.com hotline. Well, Scott, I know that the trade deadline is something that baseball fans and, of course, baseball teams look forward to every year. And I would say that, at least in recent memory, if not any trade deadline I can think of, was this not one of the craziest and busiest trade deadlines you could think of?
Oh, yeah, Grant. I mean, the sheer volume of what we saw and the timing of it from a media perspective was just so spot on. I sit next to AJ Przinsky every day, and we're on for 5.5 hours on trade deadline day after doing a daytime and nighttime show the day before that. And he's like, there better not be a lull. I have a low attention span. And I'm like, can I have your full undivided attention if we get trades every 30 to 60 minutes? And he was like, deal. And we had a deal. It ran all the way through from morning till the deadline and even 30 minutes after, still learning trades.
Absolutely. Busiest trade deadline, again, I can remember. Tons of deals. I do want to size up the winners and losers here. I've got a few ideas for both in terms of my book, but let me ask you, who won the trade deadline and why was it the San Diego Padres?
So I gave out 6 A's, and then about half of the teams were in the B range for me, and then some C's and D's, right? So for the A's, yes, the A's I would give, not the Sacramento A's, but the A grades, the San Diego Padres and the Seattle Mariners. I gave both of those A's. I also gave an A. I'll give you that one in a sec, to a team that is going to shock you. But for the Padres, yeah, I mean, what else is there to say? They shored up every hole that they had and then some. They certainly didn't have a problem with a bullpen that features, in my mind, 4 relievers who have closer-ish stuff. So then what do? They had one of the best closers and the hardest thrower in baseball. So now they have 5, and that's stacking up for the playoffs. Also, it's giving a little bit of a blow to those 4 relievers who are being used very often right now for this team to make sure that it makes it into the playoffs. If not, win the NL West. Yes, they're still in competition with the Dodgers. That's right. The Dodgers are not going to win 130 games this year and cruise to a World Series title. There is serious competition in the NL. So A.J. Preller nailed it, even with the small stuff. They needed another bat with Pop. They needed another outfielder on top of that. They needed a catcher. He did it all. It was awesome. If you're a Padres fan, there's not much more you can ask for. Obviously, only one team wins the World Series every year, but it is really fun to watch A.J. Preller cook in these time periods. The Mariners get an A for me. They shored up first and third base. They added serious thump and clutch hitting with Josh Naylor, who can hit good pitching. So I thought they did a great job there with 2 well above average bats, including Suarez, who's one of the best power hitters in our sport. Some other A minuses that are more obvious, like Mets, Phillies, Yanks, shoring up some bullpen. I know the Yanks had a bad bullpen day the other day, but it will help stuff-wise long-term. I'll give you the one other A that I think is going to grab some attention from you and your fans. Ready for this?
Go for it.
The Minnesota Twins get an A.
Okay.
Why would the Twins get an A for unloading 40% of their big league roster? Because the number one thing that Twins fans should be rooting for is a new ownership group. The ownership group is trying to sell. They have an actual, pretty large amount of debt on their books. That doesn't mean that they didn't make money. They just borrowed a lot of money. So the best way to get a sale through is to clear your books as best as possible. It is short-term pain, but if you talk to any real Twins fan in Minneapolis or across the world, their number one goal is a new owner, right? This has plagued them for years, especially the last couple years when their front office did a great job of building up a playoff team in 2023, and then they were instructed to essentially go backwards with how they were spending money. That's just not the way that you can operate a team, especially when, almost every team goes through their lull, their down period to get to this point. The Twins did that. Then in 23, they have the city captured. They win a playoff series for the first time in 20 years. And then they go backwards due to an ownership situation that eventually leads to the city crying, the owner saying the team's up for sale, and this is that last step. So I give them an A because, for example, they cleared Carlos Correa off the books and a number of other players that will help this team actually get sold. It's crazy, but it's true.
Well, there you go. We're going to have to go backwards and back through some of these steps because you pretty much went down my entire hit list for what was going on at the deadline because it was certainly busy, and it did feel like about half of it was what the Minnesota Twins were doing. We're chatting with Scott Braun of Foul Territory. He joins me on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley. He's on the waitfor.com hotline, and let me go, I think, in order of where we were, which was the Padres that go for it. Not surprising with A.J. Preller. They believe they can catch fire and perhaps catch the Dodgers here and give them a run for their proverbial money because, as you pointed out, the Dodgers can do all the spending. It does not send them straight to the World Series, though, and the Padres and Dodgers will have a wild card to fall back on, presumably, but that's going to be an interesting race for me. And the Padres, a great example of a big buyer, but we do have to point to the Twins as that big seller that doesn't necessarily, to your point, make them a big loser, but deal after deal, piece after piece, perhaps capped by the decision to move on from Carlos Correa. I think Minnesota's new direction, you laid it out pretty simply, where they could go as a result of making some of these moves and the short-term pain for fans for hopefully long-term gains. But let me ask about Correa then. He goes back to the Astros after one of the strangest rides and sagas through free agency we may ever see, and eventually lands his big money deal in Minnesota, only to get traded back to the place where it all began for him. So he may not be quite the same player these days as he was a few years ago when he left Houston, but do you think that this is a deal that could maybe re-energize Carlos Correa?
No doubt. I think he wanted out of there, but I think he very specifically wanted out of there to the right fit, and there weren't many that were going to accomplish that. He is comfortable going back to Houston. I don't think he ever wanted to leave Houston. He gets to reunite with friends both on the field and behind the scenes. Carlos Correa is an analytics nerd. Where do you go for that? You go to Minnesota. Or, I mean, Minnesota certainly helps, but you really go back to Houston where the roots of that started, right? So for him, he gets to reconnect with a lot of people that he really had a good time with. And, with the Twins, I think he had a lot of frustration. He signs back with them. They tell him that they're going to add on. And, it's not his team in the same way I thought Houston was, right? He has a lot more control, a great relationship with Jim Crane. I'm sure he didn't have that same type of relationship with the Pohlads, the owners of the Twins. So I think this will revitalize him. I think his floor is a league average bat, which doesn't sound good for that kind of money, and that's what he's been so far this year. And the only reason I say that, Grant, is because he has dealt with a slew of injuries. There's a reason why he had issues actually getting to the finish line with contracts that were agreed to with the Giants and the Mets. We have seen injuries kind of burn him. And even this year, he's played a lot, but it seems like he's playing hurt pretty often. So we'll see if things change for him. He's got to play 2 good months of ball, and then if they're in the playoffs. I think he's still a special clutch player, and I think the ceiling for him is still well above average with the bat. I think that he's going to play a really solid third base. Range-wise should be at least average. Arm should be above average. So for the Astros, it's an unconventional pickup. It's definitely a decent amount of money left on the deal, but they can handle it. So I thought that was a huge win for both sides.
Yeah, and they did get some money from Minnesota to help get that deal over the finish line, but ultimately Alex Bregman's replacement ends up being Carlos Correa. If you told me that 6 months ago, I would have made you show me how exactly those pieces were going to connect. But be that as it may, one of the teams that was interested in Carlos Correa wasn't able to sign him ultimately, for whatever reason, was the New York Mets. You brought them up. They are in a division with the Philadelphia Phillies. They're in a race that seems to be coming down to a head-to-head between those two clubs. The Braves obviously not a factor. The Marlins have been hot, but I don't think they've quite entered the discussion. But the Mets and the Phillies, they both added to their bullpen. A couple of other pieces and other moves for those teams. Who do you like in that race down the stretch and the shopping that they did this week?
Ooh, some of it will just be schedule watching and who's hot and who's not, right? Like for a bit, the Mets went on that run again where they won 7 in a row. Then their superstar bats all got pulled at the same time. So I truly think it's neck and neck. They're teams with slightly different edges. I'll give it to the Phillies just because I think they have a sturdier starting staff for the regular season. But your roster shortens up in October, so I actually think the Mets are a better October team and a better October threat, just like they were last year when they snuck into the playoffs and ended up beating the Phillies with a team that I just thought had a little more punch than them. The Phillies didn't change much with their offense since last year, so we'll see if that offense can finally turn it around in the postseason. But I do give both of these teams A- grades, which is almost as good as it gets. I mean, for Philly, if they added one more high leverage reliever, then I give them the A or the A+. But they did sign David Robertson a week and a half ago. Don't forget about that. And then Duran. It's still people I'm talking to who watch this team and are around this team every day think that the bullpen is still about the same as it was last year. So I would like to see it be a little bit better. I love Duran. I disagreed. I actually think that when you shorten up that bullpen for the playoffs, it'll be better. But they just don't have as many reliable weapons, right? They might have 3 or 4, where now you're seeing some teams that have 5 or 6. And that brings me to the Mets, right? Yeah. I mean, they picked up 3 relievers. They have Brooks Raley and they have Gregory Soto from the left side to get guys like Harper and Schwarber out for the left-on-left matchups. And then Rogers is as funky and unique as you get, and I think bullpen variety is very important. Edwin Diaz is certainly funky as well, and he's one of the best closers in baseball. And then you add Ryan Helsley, who's just going to gas it out. And I think he's been hit this year with his fastball, but I think that's going to turn around with the pitching machine that is what the New York Mets have created. So I gave them an A- as well. Both of those teams were going after the same types of players. They wanted 1 or 2 high leverage arms, and they wanted a center fielder. Phillies got Bader, and the Mets got themselves Cedric Mullins. I like both of those players as significant upgrades over guys that were getting some good playing time. The Mets had Tyrone Taylor getting a good chunk of playing time, and Mullins is much better. Same with Rojas for the Phillies, who they optioned and replaced with Bader. Funny, both of them were going for Luis Robert, and the White Sox think that he's a superstar. That is just not the case right now, so they end up keeping him. It was cool to watch those two compete for like very similar types of players just now over the past couple weeks.
Yeah, and that competition will obviously continue over the next couple of months to see who wins the NL East, and then we'll, of course, see who could get into a wild card position, because both of those teams clearly have put themselves in position for that, and we're looking to put themselves over the top with the moves they were making to close out the month of July. Wrapping up here with Scott Braun of Foul Territory. He joins me from the Diamond with Grant McAuley on the WadeFord.com hotline. last question for you, unfortunately, is a painful one for us here in Atlanta. I was hoping, maybe there'd be a show where I'd have you on and we'd talk about what the Braves were doing at the trade deadline and what it did to bolster their club to maybe put them over the top. Maybe they'd be a winner. I don't know. It's happened before, but it didn't happen here in 2025. I'd like to get your take on Atlanta. You've watched from afar. The season has easily been one of the most disappointing in MLB this year, and I think probably any year for this Braves franchise, just based purely on the expectations coming into the season. A trade deadline was not going to fix all of that, but what's your read on the job ahead for Alex Anthopoulos and this front office this winter? Because I've said time and again, I think this is the most important winter of Alex Anthopoulos' tenure with the Braves.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think when you're coming off such a disappointing year that doesn't even give you a sniff at a postseason race in the second half of the year and the expectations are high, people are going to look at you for an answer and to switch things up. Even if you don't necessarily have tens of millions of dollars to spend extra on this team, there are still things that Alex can do. And we know he's very direct and decisive, and I don't think he's going to sit around in the offseason. So I do think there will be changes to some of the regular names that you know. I mean, first off, with the trade deadline, obviously they get a D. The reason I give Ds out is generally inactivity and not trading away a piece that you have nothing to do with. I don't know what happened with Raisel Iglesias, but I'm sure there was a team that wanted him. So he's a free agent after this year. I don't understand how you don't trade that player away. I just have no clue. I mean, everybody's looking for relief pitching. I guarantee you there were phone calls. So I don't know what happened. Maybe they wanted the Braves to eat a certain amount of money. So what? I mean, if you're going to get a prospect back and you're not in a playoff race, get something, right? I'm the one who will definitely say many prospects are overrated. Make that trade. But on the other side, don't save it. So, and with Ozuna, I don't know. I mean, I know he's battled injury issues this year. There are some teams that won't take him on just based on past precedent of some things that have been very public with him getting in trouble. That's a real thing. Owners, it's one owner that decides if they're going to bring a player on or not. So I give him a D just for the inactivity, Raisel, and maybe one or two others that they could have entertained offers for. But as far as the offseason, Grant, I don't have the exact answer yet, but I do know that something is going to change. I can't see Alex rolling the same team out there. I know that they missed their entire starting rotation, so the chances that they were going to make the playoffs are quite low, but I do think you need to shake it up with the lineup. A team to look at is the Phillies. They haven't done that. Last year, fans were really disappointed in how things ended up in the playoffs, and they were expecting them to switch things up. Alec Boehm was circling around trade rumors all off season. It didn't end up happening. I thought the Phillies should have done something just to switch it up. I just think sending the same exact starting nine for the most part into the next spring training after a disappointing year is not sending the right message even to your team. I'm not going to act like I know who they feel like is the best clubhouse fit, who they project looks great going forward, but I can tell you, yes, they're definitely going to do something. I know they weren't going to do that at the trade deadline, but is it Harris? Is it Albies? Is it Murphy? Something is going to happen where you're going to look at the line and be like, all right, this is a little bit different. Let's see if this works out better. Because as far as pitching, I thought they did have the starting rotation to compete. So I feel like they're in a good spot there. They just lost all of their arms in 1 year, and that happens to some teams.
Yeah, and that's a tough one, especially when you've had an underperforming offense where you would kind of wonder, even with all the pitching injuries, if you're better in one-run games, if you'd been able to at least kind of be closer to where you hoped by the time these injuries started stacking up. Maybe you could have gotten creative at the trade deadline, but this, not the year probably for Alex Anthopoulos to get creative with a team that is so far under 500 and so far out of the race and in a very unfamiliar position. So a lot of, I think, big conversations and some big decisions ahead for the Braves over the course of the winter. Scott, I appreciate all of your time as always. Let the folks know where they can catch Foul Territory and how they can connect with you.
Thank you, Grant. I always enjoy these combos, as you know, ball, and it's really fun to talk about even a Braves team that's going through a rainy season, even on a day like today. You can find us at Foul Territory Show on any social media account besides Twitter. It's at Foul Territory TV because show is too many characters. And then wherever you get your podcast, type in Foul Territory. We interview a number of Braves players throughout the year. Chris Sale stands out as a pretty regular guest on our show. And then you can also find us on TV in the Atlanta area on the FDSN network down there, home of the Braves. So FT's all over the place. We love hearing from everyone, answering questions, and Braves fans get through the season, and then we'll have fun talking about how they can switch things up in the offseason. Thank you, Grant.
Always great to catch up with Scott Braun of Foul Territory. When we come back, we will turn our attention back to what's going on with the Atlanta Braves, wrap up this weekend, and of course, take a look at what's ahead down the stretch for a Braves club that unfortunately is not where it wants to be. We'll size up some of that next on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
I love baseball. Now back to more Grant McAuley and From the Diamond. Brought to you by Mark Spain Real Estate. Get a guaranteed offer from Mark Spain Real Estate. 855-299-SOLD. On Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back in to From the Diamond with Grant McAuley here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game, live from the Kia Studios on a Sunday as we continue on wrapping up the weekend for the Braves. Talking about the trade deadline a little bit, as you just heard. I had Brad Rowland on from Hammer Territory. I had Scott Braun on from Foul Territory. And those guys were able to give us some insights on what they saw over the past week and, of course, what we've seen from the Braves all season long. And I thought that was an important thing. I wanted to at least ask Scott from the bigger, national perspective or lens. Not that it makes it any more on point than what we've got here, in the local sphere. I think there's a lot of Braves fans that will live and die on every pitch if you give them a team that's worth living and dying for. And unfortunately, the 2025 Braves have just not been able to, in some cases, get out of their own way. In other cases, do the little things to put themselves in a position to succeed, and that is what's led to some of the frustrations of this year. And then you throw in the injuries and some of the other uncertainty that's gone on around this team. And some of it tracks back to last winter. And I do want to get into this because I feel like it's kind of the other half of the discussion. It's not just, the trade deadline, what happened? The trade deadline, what did the Braves do? What did they not do? What were they not willing to do? And one of the things we heard from Alex Anthopoulos a little bit earlier was, they're not really willing to pay their players to go away and play somewhere else without feeling like they got at least a decent return, a return that was worth doing the deal for. And that seems to be what the Braves could not find, particularly for Raisel Iglesias. I was surprised, and you heard Scott Braun not long ago say the same thing, surprised that Raisel Iglesias did not change addresses. Because he's not just a guy that, he struggled for 6-8 weeks to start the year and has just continued to be that way. I feel like he's looked better lately, even though he's had a couple of bad games. Well, guess what? That's Major League Baseball. Even the best pitchers, best players, they're going to have bad games every once in a while. I don't think it cancels out the progress that he had made. But I say all that to say, the money is a component in it, but I don't think it's the main focus around the trade deadline. But it's certainly going to be a big focus when it comes to the offseason. And it's fairly obvious that the Braves have got some serious roster questions to figure out. Some of them, I think, will have to do with the players that are currently under contract or they have options on, how they perform and how they finish the year of 2025 to kind of determine what you need for 2026. And there are two very obvious guys that fall under this one. And I'll give you a third one in a minute, though. Unfortunately, that third one, I'm not sure when he's going to be back on the field, and that's Austin Riley. So put that one off to the side. But two players we've talked a lot about all season long, all summer, have been Michael Harris II and Ozzie Albies. Ozzie Albies and Michael Harris II. When it's come to the Braves lineup and what's not been working and who's not been hot, those were the two guys that really kind of became the lightning rod for the underperformance of the lineup. And I don't think that's altogether, fair. However, and in the interest of just being realistic about it, who said it was going to be fair? This is a numbers-driven business. And the numbers for Ozzie Albies in particular, I think were fairly disappointing based on what we had seen him do in the past as a multiple-time All-Star, a guy that's capable of 70, 75 more extra base hits a season, which is very uncommon for a second baseman, driving in 100 runs, scoring 100 runs, stealing bases. But you just weren't seeing all that in the early going. And I think that some of that, at least, could be the carryover effect from the broken wrist last year. And you'll remember that Ozzie came back as quickly as he could a season ago just to be around for whatever the Braves could do in October, and he was only batting right-handed. So I think that there was probably, whether it's from a strength perspective, just an overall comfortability perspective, some lingering effect from that wrist. And we've seen in the second half, and really in the month of July, and maybe a little bit longer if you kind of track it back. I don't have all the baseball reference pages up here, and maybe I should, but Ozzie has been walking more. He's been hitting the ball with a greater regularity in terms of just picking up base hits in general. We've started to see a little bit of power from him. he's just looked a little bit more like Ozzie Albies over this past month, and that's great to see. And hopefully we'll see a lot more of it in the month of August and in the month of September, because the Braves have a $7 million option on Ozzie Albies. And about a month ago, I think this conversation really started up online where folks were just thinking, I don't know if he's worth the $7 million, so maybe the Braves will decline that option. When he signed that contract in, I believe it was April of 2019, for $7 million a year, all the way through 2025, with two more options for $7 million a year, pretty much the term that was thrown out there for most people was like, this is highway robbery. And for the most part, I feel like the Braves have gotten more than a sufficient ROI on that. But Ozzie has gone through some injuries from time to time, and particularly in 2024 and maybe over into 2025, it's affected his performance. But a $7 million option for a second baseman who's capable of hitting 25 to 30 homers, 35, 40 doubles, again, stealing bases, knocking in runs, scoring runs, all those things, for $7 million? I mean, most teams, I think there's 29 other teams that say, sign me up for that. But there have been some questions just about, will he get back to that? And over the first 3 months, I think it was pretty fair to question, but I think he is at least starting to course correct and remind folks that, hey, there is some capability in here for a kid that's under 30, and that's why I call him a kid. This is not an easy decision to just say, okay, well, he had a bad year. He's been injury prone. We're just going to move on, because then the question becomes, how do you replace Ozzie Albies? When you already have a question about how are you going to solve the shortstop question? And that's not a knock on Nick Allen, the defender, but in terms of an offensive profile, he doesn't have one. And when he doesn't have one, then Ozzie Albies is struggling, and Michael Harris, who I'll get into more in a moment, is struggling, and you get nothing out of left field. And in part of that is because your left fielder got suspended for 80 games for performance-enhancing drugs. That doesn't help. Your third baseman is having an off year. Your right fielder was not back for a couple of extra months because he needed to get over an injury and is currently going to be going through maybe a little bit more of getting back from an injury, though I think we can all breathe a sigh of relief for Ronald Acuña Jr., and we'll talk about him more in a little bit too. But you just had so many places in this lineup that opposing pitchers could go for outs, and they were doing it. And the Braves, from the 2023 lens, the club that just didn't seem to have any weak spots in this lineup, we knew it might be an outlier. But to see this kind of just drastic pendulum swing back the other direction to being a club that, I mean, they're not even really hitting homers on a regular basis all the time, let alone scoring runs on the basis that they were a couple of years ago. And we saw that in 2024. But you could chalk up some of it, I feel like, a portion of it, to injuries. But I just don't really know that the lineup especially can point to, well, it's just injury that's caused them to not be consistent. There's been, I think, in some cases, just a lack of execution on the players in general, and I think that they've been feeling that. And I know that David O'Brien wrote that piece in The Athletic when the Braves changed hitting coaches from Kevin Seitzer to Tim Hires, and Kevin Seitzer said, look, I mean, these are good players, but they can't get outside of their head, and that's caused a lot of the struggles that we saw in 2024. And that may be true. I would defer to Kevin Seitzer because he spent a lot more time around them than I did and worked, obviously, in a capacity in which he would have a better, a finger on the pulse of what exactly is going on down there to try to course correct for all of that. I feel like course correct is really the phrase of the show. And it's maybe the phrase of the Braves season and off season if we're talking about a 2026 that's going to be anywhere close to the expectations that this club has. But I told you we'd talk about Michael Harris, so we're going to. He's been a completely different hitter for what looks like 3 to 4 weeks. It coincides with a lot of work that he put in, clearly. I mean, I know folks were frustrated about it. I don't think anybody was more frustrated than Michael Harris because he had a first half to forget. But he has come out of the All-Star break with a little momentum, I think, from a batting stance change that he made just before the break. And we've seen him much more comfortable at the plate, much better swing decisions, much more hard-hit contact. He's going to all fields. And he's starting to rack up the base hits. He is dialing down the strikeouts. He is drawing a walk here and there, which is also nice. But he's looked a lot more like the guy that you expected him to be and the guy that you knew was in there. But it took an awfully long time to get there. So I don't know. And maybe I'm just being glass half full here, but I'm not as worried about center field as maybe some people are. Although the not so great first half, get hot in the second half thing, I know Michael Harris would either rather A, split the difference, or B, just put together 2 great halves. Because I think he's capable of doing that. And I feel like this is the 3rd straight year, or at least 2nd straight year that I've come in and said, I think Michael Harris II is a breakout candidate for this club. And people would point and say, how can he be a breakout candidate? He's already been a Rookie of the Year. Everybody knows who he is. But I just feel like there's another level to his game. So I'll continue to be optimistic about him, even if it feels misguided at times. And that was a long and tough and arduous task to find any sort of optimism around what Michael was going through the first 3 months. But that's what a baseball season is. It is a journey. There are highs and lows to that journey, and I feel like he's done a pretty nice job of finding his way to the adjustments he needed to make, even if it took a little bit longer than he or the team would care for. So where does all this factor in to the winter decision-making? Well, it's all different pieces to this puzzle. Because the Braves are going to have to size up the holes and the missing pieces to reassemble the roster in a way that gets them back on the right track in 2026. That's the mission for Alex Anthopoulos and company. It is not, if you choose to accept it, that is your mission. That is your mandate. The rotation, the bullpen, the lineup, the leadership for this club, all of those are decisions and conversations that the Braves are going to have over the course of this upcoming winter. And that's why I continue to say I think it's the most important that Alex Anthopoulos has had since he took over the reins of this Braves organization after 2017. Because the Braves in 2017, there's a 90-loss season. And look, if we check what's going on here now, the Braves are on pace for about 90 losses. But given everything that they were going through at the end of 2017 with the international prospect scandal and losing their GM, and things could have gone very south and stayed there. But they didn't. And part of that is because they were able to put the right person in charge so that they were able to take the talent on hand and start to turn it into results with the right leadership, the right coaches. A lot of different things have gone right. Many more things have gone right, I guess I should say, over the last 7 years than have not. But 2025 was a cruel, cruel twist in the Braves plot and in the Braves story overall. So I think the question is, and I said all of that to set this up, is are the Braves prepared to spend? And I think that question is going to get more and more traction now, given that payroll didn't go up this year, despite the claims that it could or that it would or that it has always in the past, so either implicitly or otherwise, that spending wasn't going to be an issue. But they did not spend as much this year as they did last year. They certainly didn't raise the payroll by making significant free agent signings over the course of the winter. And the one that they did, I don't know. I'm not going to put words in anybody's mouth, but I'm sure there have been some second thoughts, some buyer's remorse on the $42 million that you spent on Jurickson Profar. And that story is not finished, but first impression, not the best. But the money, I think, is a big question for this winter because they've managed to stay under the luxury tax. So they've reset the CBT. So now you don't have to sit around and wonder about, what is the tax situation? And Alex has said multiple times, the tax is only on the overage, so we're not necessarily worried about it. And I think that that's a good way to look at it. And I think all clubs should look at it that way. But you've got to get there and got to spend there in order for it to kind of match up with it's not going to stop us from doing something. I think that's what a lot of fans want to see, is that this is a club that is building a nice core, that is keeping that core together, that is acquiring the pieces that it needs to complement that core, and not afraid or unable to go out and get the pieces it needs when that plan has to pivot, has to change, is changed by injury or underperformance or whatever it may be. So the Braves are a top 10 payroll in baseball. And I think 15 years ago or so, 10 years ago even, maybe less, people may have not thought that that was coming. But I know that they've stated it, that they'd like to be a top 5 payroll. That has not happened yet. 2026 might give them the opportunity to, depending on what they do in the free agent market or trades or whatever they want to make. But the question, will they spend? I think you need a more clear answer. I think you need to see them prove it. And I think that money may not fix all the problems, but it certainly helps. And the Braves could use some of that heading into this winter and obviously 2026 and beyond. We'll continue talking about this on the other side. We'll also hear a couple of more comments from Alex Anthopoulos about Ronald Acuña Jr., about the state of the Braves rotation, and much more. And we'll look ahead to the week to come as the Braves return to Truist Park after their weekend in Bristol. It all comes your way next on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
I love baseball. Now back to more Grant McAuley and From the Diamond. Brought to you by Mark Spain Real Estate. Get a guaranteed offer from Mark Spain Real Estate. 855-299-SOLD. On Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back to From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. We're wrapping up the weekend, wrapping up this edition of the show. Got a few more notes, though, in front of me on the couple of papers that I have left. A lot of chicken scratch, a lot of things that I've circled that I want to get to, and we'll see if we can, I don't know, if I have to rapid fire, maybe I'll rapid fire. I don't know. I could save some of it for next week. I could also share some of it on social media, and you would know that if you're following me. At Grant McAuley, that's where you can find me. Also, if you missed anything on this edition of the show or any other show, make sure you subscribe to From the Diamond wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find it on the Odyssey app. Had some really good conversations with Scott Braun of Foul Territory a little bit earlier and Brad Rowland of Hammer Territory. Recommend you check out their shows as well. Subscribe to their podcasts and channels. Some really great stuff to kind of punctuate what was a very busy week across Major League Baseball, but not a busy week for the Braves in terms of the transactions. I guess at least the trade deadline. We did see the Braves shuffle around some pieces, and I kind of thought maybe that meant that they were getting ready to make a deal or two. And I really expected a couple on trade deadline day, but it just did not happen. But the Braves have got some bigger things, a bigger mission ahead of them to close out 2025 and move their way into 2026. But the winter between now and then is going to be very important for this club. Let's talk a little bit about Sunday. There were some good things that happened after the rain on Saturday, kind of put a damper on that Speedway Classic that Major League Baseball had the Reds and Braves playing in Bristol, Tennessee. The Braves lost Spencer Strider due to that first rain delay because he'd warmed up to pitch, and then they had to sit around and wait. So Atlanta was going to take no chances with having Strider warm up a second time and go out there and pitch. So that put the Braves in a bit of a bind. They had to run Austin Cox out there, a reliever by trade that they just brought up. He's been up a couple of times this year, and it felt like he was just pitching in the pouring down rain. And the more I watched this, the more I just could not take my eyes off that infield. Every time they showed it, I was like, there are so many puddles out there. This is a Major League Baseball game. How in the world is this going on? And I think that became the prevailing thought. And then these poor guys, and this is who I feel bad for, is that grounds crew. These guys are running out there with those, 30 or 40-pound bags, maybe more, of Diamond Dry over their shoulder, trying to run out there and clean up all that water. They're working and working and working and working, and then finally everybody, I think, looked around at each other and thought that this is not going to help. And they had to pull that tarp again, and ultimately the game was suspended in the very first inning, which is just a crazy, crazy thing. But ultimately, the game was picked back up on Sunday when fans were told to pack a lunch because they ran out of concessions on Saturday too, so that was a little bit odd. But the Braves were able to pick themselves up, more importantly, a 4-2 win. And in the midst of that, we saw Eli White with a multi-homer game. First multi-homer game of his career. And this gave the Braves not only a win on a Sunday, even if it's credited as a Saturday, as I talked about way back in the start of the show. This was a win on a Sunday before an episode of From the Diamond. So I'm claiming it as a win on a Sunday, at least physically speaking. Figuratively, might be the best I can do, but I'm going to take it. And in the midst of that, it also gave the Braves their first series win of the second half. And we're talking about the first week of August. The Braves came out of the All-Star break, and they did not enter with a ton of momentum, obviously. They were multiple games under 500. Just heading into July, I believe they were 6 or 7 games under 500 and proceeded to go 8 or 9 extra games under 500. One of the worst Julys that the Braves have had as a franchise ever. I mean, worst, I believe, since at least 1988. And that was a very different version of the Atlanta Braves that did not have the expectations of the 2025 squad. But we saw a couple of good things. Eli White's 2-home-run game, that was a big one. And how about Hurston Waldrop? Because the Braves are trying to figure out this whole rotational thing. And we're going to hear something from Alex Anthopoulos here in a minute regarding the rotation. I did want to get to this. But it's going to be an issue moving forward covering these innings. They picked up Eric Fetty. They picked up Carlos Carrasco. They brought them in to eat some innings. They have Spencer Strider. For better or worse, they've got Bryce Elder, but they still have questions in this rotation because the entire opening day starting 5 is on the 60-day IL. But Hurston Waldrop with 5 2/3 innings of 1-run ball, I think we're going to see some more of this kid down the stretch, and I think he's earned it, quite frankly. 5 2/3 innings coming on in relief after a long drive just to get to Bristol, just to start. 3 hits, 2 walks, 4 strikeouts, 75 pitches on short notice. Yeah, sign me up to see a little bit more of Hurston Waldrop. As I mentioned, and you heard earlier in the show, Alex Anthopoulos talked about a variety of topics, and one of the things was this starting rotation. What is going on with it, and was that kind of the death knell to the season? I think we know the answer to that, but Here's Alex Anthopoulos weighing in on the rotation and what all of these injuries ultimately meant for the 2025 Braves.
Obviously, when you're having seasons like this, you look at everything, of course. When we were, obviously we scuffled for a long time, and it felt like the Mets series was going to be hopefully a turning point. Our run differential was still, I think we were right there with the Padres and close to some of the other teams. But we had a rotation that was competitive. I mean, a year ago, we led MLB in ERA, right? Everyone talked about the Mariners. We were percentage points ahead of them. So of the 30 clubs, we had the best ERA of anybody in baseball a year ago, with tons of injuries on the position player side, right? But we had tremendous health in the rotation, and we were able to win more games than we did the year we won the World Series. So we did feel like with Sale, Schwellenbach, the way Holmes was throwing the ball, Strider we thought was really starting to get going. He started out slowly. Those four, felt like, okay, those four are pretty solid. If you could stabilize a little bit and get going, you're trying to do stuff earlier. I know I went on the radio and I said, trying to add now. You can add a 5-hole starter and solidify that rotation even more. And then you can get to the deadline and solidify even more. That was the thought and that was the hope. Obviously, we're going to have to play well. But Sale, unbelievable game against the Mets, dives for that ball, freak thing, cracks 2 ribs, lose him for a long period of time. Clearly, we put him on the 60-day IL. That one's tough, and you're thinking, okay, maybe we could still keep this thing together. Then you lose Schwellenbach, and it's a lot to overcome. And just with that many starters out, right, for a long period of time, those are 2 Cy Young caliber. The way Sale was throwing, he was going to be in the Cy Young mix if he continued. Schwellenbach was easily all-star, and people were talking about him for Cy Young as well. Losing those 2 on top of, obviously, Ronaldo first start in, being an all-star a year ago, Smith-Sharver, just a lot of starters. So once you lose that stability in the rotation, and look, that's the thing with all the offensive issues we had last year, and it was so much so with guys that we lost, a lot of freak things, but that rotation gives you stability. And now all of a sudden that rotation isn't the same, and your bullpen's throwing a ton of innings, right? Sale and Schwellenbach are going 6, 7 innings every time out. Now your starters are going 4 2/3. Now your bullpen's covering a lot more. It just ends up snowballing on you. And that to me was the real turning point of, and look, who knows if they had stayed healthy, who knows what position we would have been in, but that was where our mindset was. We were trying to push aggressively to add. Once Sale goes down and shortly thereafter Schwellenbach goes down, then really became very challenging to overcome because we didn't have enough bodies to cover all those innings.
Yeah, there's just no two ways about that. You're not going to be able to replace Cy Young level contributions like you get from a Chris Sale and a Spencer Schwellenbach, who is having, I think, an all-star caliber season, as Alex Anthopoulos just talked about. Then you throw in, you've already lost the all-star Ronaldo Lopez after 1 start. A.J. Smith-Shawver was pitching, I think, extremely well. Could have been a factor in the Rookie of the Year race with his teammate Drake Baldwin. And you lost him after 9 starts. And then cherry on top, Grant Holmes, one of the great stories of this year for the Braves. Unfortunately, looks like he's going to be out for a long time as well. His season is over with an elbow injury. So 5 guys from the opening day rotation, your entire opening day rotation going on the 60-day IL by the time you get to the end of July. Cruel and unusual is the phrase that comes to mind. But the Braves season, the die was already cast before this. I think that rotation did everything it could to try to hold things as level as possible, to try to pull the nose up. And it was supporting a bullpen that was, I think, understaffed, if you will, in terms of the quality that it needs. Because, look, I think we all saw what happened when these guys had to start throwing a lot more innings. And that's also not fair to the bullpen. I will point that out. But either way, between that, the run-scoring woes and the inconsistencies overall, losing that starting rotation, in particular those figureheads like Chris Sale and Spencer Schwellenbach, who, well, they're more than figureheads. They're your top performers. You needed those, and it's just crazy to feel like you had that rotation I just laid out there, and you thought, all right, we're going to add Spencer Strider to this. This is going to get better. And ultimately, Spencer Strider is just the last man standing, and again, that just feels cruel and unusual for this club, which has been through a lot. Now, unfortunately, that's not all the injury news that we're going to be talking about. Austin Riley was forced out of today's game, the Sunday game, the Speedway Classic, the continuation thereof, as he got into a little bit of a race with Ellie De La Cruz. And unfortunately, Austin Riley might have gotten the tag on in time to avert a run at the plate, but he hurt himself again, that lower abdominal injury that landed him on the injured list right before the All-Star break. And now it seems like Austin Riley very well could miss some time again. Brian Snitker saying after the game that they're going to reevaluate him and decide what the next move is for Austin Riley. But he just missed some time and could miss some more time with that. And, you can put him on the list with Ozzie Albies and with Michael Harris that you wanted to see a lot out of the last couple of months for those guys in particular. Riley has had some challenges this year that are not necessarily so much health-related, but a lot more strikeouts, not as much power. I know he wanted to do more. Well, we're going to see how much Austin Riley is going to be on the field going down the stretch, which is an unfortunate conversation to have. Another guy who hopefully we'll be seeing back in a few weeks, although it felt like it was going to be near catastrophic based on the initial reaction, but fortunately good news came in, is Ronald Acuña Jr. He was injured during the Royals series, scoring from first, and tweaked what we believed at the time, at least what the team said, was his Achilles. Well, you don't need to hear that word more than once to start getting very worried about the prognosis and very worried about what the outcome could be for a player, no matter who they are and what they are. We've seen it a lot as far as Braves fans are concerned. Michael Soroka went through that multiple times, and it really derailed a career that we thought we'd get a lot more out of here in Atlanta. And hopefully he's able to put something like that together. But putting all that aside, sigh of relief because it ended up being a grade 1 calf strain for Ronald Acuña Jr., not an Achilles injury. Alex Anthopoulos talked a little bit about what the time frame is and what the Braves' thinking is for Acuña, who many people were calling for at the time to be shut down for the rest of the year. I don't really think that's a route that the team's interested in taking. Here's Alex Anthopoulos.
He pointed towards the Achilles area. We're looking at Achilles calf, but it's Achilles areas where he's pointing. We're waiting for the doctor to get him checked out and so on. After the game, when he's getting checked out, they said, look, it's more calf than anything else. It's more likely calf than anything else. We'll get an MRI from a procedural standpoint. Look, I understand. It's Ronald Acuña Jr. He's had injuries, like you said. People hear Achilles. I do wonder if we would have said calf, if the concern level still probably strong, but not the same. But, the player's pointing to that. We say it all the time, right? A guy comes out and says, I'm sore here. And then you look at him further, a doctor. So, look, right now, all the exams and tests, it's a grade 1. It's not serious. So we think it'll be in the 2 to 3 week range. Look, there's a chance that it's shorter than that. What you don't want to do is under promise a return to play date. And now all of a sudden people start speculating there was a setback and so on, but he's already feeling so much better. So I think, it's one of those things that didn't look good on TV and he was sore and he did it when he scored from first the day before and he stepped on home. But right now, all the testing that we've done is he's already feeling better and we're optimistic. It won't be long. And to sit there and to say, you had this and we're going to shut you down for 2 months. I mean, it's just like, anytime someone has it's a grade 1. So
he's healthy.
If you told me there was a week left, yeah, that'd be a consideration. But there's 2 months left. He needs to play. He needs to condition his body. At some point, he's missed so much baseball, right? When you think about it, he had the MVP season in 23, gets injured May of 24, misses a good chunk of this season. Again, if there was a very limited amount of time, I don't know that you would rush him back or something to play for a week, but you've got 2 months left. And we'll obviously make sure he's cleared and get him checked out and so on. But look, we were so conservative with his return to play now from the ACL. I mean, we added months to what we did the first time. We added so much time. And I think that allowed him to play at such a high level when he came back. But we could have brought him back sooner even to start the year, but we just want to make sure we did it right. So we're going to be conservative. We're going to be careful. But at some point, if he's symptom-free and fine, and to tell him to just, hey, sit out the next 2 months, hang out at home, I just don't think that makes any sense.
No, and I don't either. And I don't think that's a route that the team wants to go. I don't think that's the route that Ronald Acuña Jr. is asking for. Now, you do need to manage it as responsibly as possible. You don't want to have guys taking unnecessary risks. But if everything checks out, if he's pain-free, I think that playing is kind of the operative term of what players do. And hopefully we'll see Ronald Acuña Jr. back in just a few weeks on the diamond for the Braves, because there may not be a ton to enjoy down the stretch for a team that is as far out of it as Atlanta is, but anytime you get to watch Ronald Acuña Jr. play a baseball game, that is one of the highlights that you can pretty much write down as you buy those tickets. So what's upcoming for Atlanta as they wrap up this weekend against the Reds? They will be playing the Milwaukee Brewers for 3 games. That starts on Monday, runs through Wednesday, and then a 5-game series against the red-hot Miami Marlins. We'll have to talk about them a little bit more next week, but that's a club that just got back to 500 and did so at the expense of the New York Yankees. And not many clubs have been able to do that quite the way the Marlins have, and they're using it to ride their way right into the wild card race. But that's going to do it for this week on From the Diamond. I'd like to thank Brad Rowland for making some time for me from Hammer Territory, Scott Braun of Foul Territory, and, of course, all of you for making From the Diamond part of your Sunday as well. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Find it on the Odyssey app. Thanks to my producer, Josh, as well, for a great job today, and I will catch you next week on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley right here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app. And until then, so long, everyone.